They say legends never announce themselves. But that morning, before anyone knew her name, before the whisper of her past rippled across the gym, you could feel something shift when she rolled through the doors, like a silent warning the air hadn't learned how to translate yet. And if you agree that real strength often hides in plain sight, make sure to like and subscribe because this story honors every warrior who walks, or wheels, into a room carrying more than anyone realizes. Now, the morning sun poured in through the high windows of Falcon Ridge Military Base's main training complex, cutting long white beams across the polished floor, and in those beams moved soldiers, cadets, instructors, all in a swirling routine of sweat, orders, and discipline. And right there in the middle of it, unnoticed at first, came Lena Ward, her wheelchair gliding with an almost soundless confidence, the soft hum of her customized wheels nearly swallowed by the echoing cadence calls from the outdoor drill field. She wore a black athletic hoodie, sleeves slightly rolled, eyes steady as a sniper's but softened by an exhaustion she carried quietly. She was 28 but looked older in the ways that mattered. Battle-aged, sorrow-aged, steel-aged, the kind of aging you don't see until life has forced you past death and back again. Most people didn't see those things. Most people only saw the chair. And the three young soldiers who swaggered out of the weight room certainly didn't see anything else. They saw a target of convenience, an interruption to their morning bravado, something they could push against to rebuild the confidence the barbell had stripped from them. The first one deliberately drifted into her path, forcing her to stop. His two friends laughed, the kind of short, immature snickers that always precede trouble. "Watch out, wheelchair freak incoming," one said, loud enough for half the gym to hear. Lena didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She let the insult wash over her the way she'd learned to let mortar blasts and panic do. Not resisting, not absorbing, simply allowing it to pass. "Sorry," she said, her voice calm and cool as river stone. "I just need to get through." But apologies only encourage certain types. The tallest one stepped behind her chair and nudged the push handles. Not hard, but just enough to invade her space, and to test her reaction. The second private snorted. "Where you heading? PX? We're rolling in for disability checks." The third added, "This hall's for active personnel. Visitors stick to the sidelines." They didn't know. They didn't know that the woman they mocked once infiltrated a hostile village with both legs working and a mind trained like a razor. They didn't know that she'd spent 2 years in a PSYOP detachment so covert that even her medical evacuation paperwork had been blacked out. They didn't know that her legs didn't work because she chose to finish a mission instead of evacuating after the first blast. Because she was stubborn enough to crawl through fire for someone else's kid. They didn't know she'd been nicknamed Ghost 6 by operators who don't give nicknames lightly. They saw none of that. They saw only the wheels. Lena's service dog, a golden retriever named Atlas, stepped forward, but she raised a hand gently to stop him. She didn't want escalation. She didn't want attention. She only wanted to get to the indoor track where she'd been invited to observe resilience training for transitioning soldiers. But kids playing at being wolves always mistake quiet for fear. "Yo," the tallest private said, leaning down, breath heavy with the protein shake he'd slammed 30 minutes earlier. "I asked where you think you're going." Lena inhaled once, deeply. "I'm authorized to be here," she said. "Please let me pass." "Authorized?" One scoffed. "To do what? Race the treadmill?" The ugly laughter that followed echoed off the rafters. More people were watching now, some uncomfortable but silent, some entertained, some simply unsure of what they were seeing. Lena felt the old familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, not anger, but the instinctive calculation of exits, distances, reactions, the kind of subconscious tactical math that never fully leaves a combat-trained mind. She could de-escalate. She could outthink. She could overpower, even from a chair, if she had to. But she didn't want to. Not today. She just wanted to breathe without being someone's punching bag. Then the second private reached out and grabbed her wheel, halting it. That touch, that claiming, that assumption of control, lit something deep in her memory. A flash of sand, smoke, someone dragging her limp lower body through rubble. The hoodie sleeve slipped slightly as she recoiled, revealing the edge of a patch stitched onto the strap of her black sling bag. A ghostly white skull shrouded in static waves, a dagger behind it. No unit name printed. No unit name needed. The PSYOP ghost patch. Only a handful of operators in the entire world wore it. Not issued. Earned. Blood earned. The privates didn't recognize it. But someone else did. Across the gym, Master Sergeant Cruz, a hardened man with the posture of someone who'd served in more deserts than most people had visited, froze mid-stretch. His eyes locked onto the patch with a force that stripped the breath from him. For a moment, he looked like he'd seen an apparition. Then his face shifted. Fear, respect, urgency, blending into one expression soldiers rarely wore in front of subordinates. He stood so fast his bench clattered. And without waiting for context, without waiting for explanation, he started moving toward her. Because Master Sergeant Cruz knew exactly what that patch meant. And he knew exactly who she was. The gym didn't know it yet, but the air had changed. The ghost in the chair had been recognized. And everything, absolutely everything, was about to shift. Master Sergeant Cruz crossed the gym with a speed that didn't match the calm, deliberate way his boots struck the floor, his stride tight with urgency as he approached the cluster of soldiers circling Lena Ward's wheelchair, like hyenas too inexperienced to know they'd just cornered a lion. The tallest private still had a hand on her wheel, his grip tightening as he noticed Cruz's approach, misinterpreting the sergeant's expression as irritation over a gym scuffle rather than the dawning horror it truly was. Cruz didn't bother addressing the private first. He crouched slightly beside Lena, lowering himself to her eye level in a gesture of respect, so sharp it cut through the gym's ambient noise like a blade to glass. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice steady but edged with gravity. "Are you all right?" The T at the end of "all right" hadn't even faded before the young soldiers blinked in utter confusion. "Ma'am?" From Cruz? A man who had once torn into a junior lieutenant, so hard the poor kid looked like he'd been reduced 2 pay grades? Cruz finally looked up at the private gripping her wheel. When he spoke again, the softness evaporated. "Release her chair. Now." The private, trapped in his own ego, scoffed. "Gunny, relax. She's not supposed to be. I said now." It was a growl, primal and rigid with command authority so absolute that the private's hand snapped back on instinct, as if burned. Lena tugged her hoodie sleeve down, hiding the patch again, but Cruz had already seen too much. He straightened, pulled his phone from his cargo pocket, and stepped just far enough away to be out of earshot, though his eyes never left the trio of soldiers. His voice dropped low, urgent, fretted with an intensity that made Lena's pulse flicker because she recognized it. The tone of someone reporting a contact sighting, not a gym incident. "Ox, this is Cruz," he said. Silence. Then, quieter. "We found her. Confirm visual on Ghost 6. A burst of static. Then a single, stunned whisper on the other end. "You're certain?" "Absolutely certain." Cruz hung up and returned to Lena, positioning himself between her and the soldiers like a shield. The tallest private, now visibly rattled by the abrupt shift in tone, tried to salvage authority. "Gunny, what's happening?" "She crashed the gym without clearance. She should be checked by." Cruz turned, slowly, his stare the kind that could flatten mountains. "Private, I'm going to give you one chance to stop talking before the next words you say become part of a disciplinary hearing." The private swallowed hard, his bravado evaporating as fear crept in. Around them, the gym fell into an uncanny hush. Barbells paused mid-air, treadmill runners slowed, instructors glanced over their shoulders. There's a specific kind of silence in military spaces, the kind that grows when rank senses rank, when instinct smells history and legacy walking through the air like ozone before lightning strikes. That silence deepened when the gym doors swung open with a force that seemed almost theatrical. The base colonel entered first, uniform crisp, medals catching the overhead lights. Behind him marched the command sergeant major, a wall of muscle, scars, and decades of service carried in the way he held his jaw. They came fast, like men who'd run the entire distance from headquarters. The colonel didn't look at the equipment, the soldiers, or Cruz. His eyes locked on Lena, and then he stopped 3 feet from her and saluted. The room exhaled one collective, shocked breath. Soldiers straightened. Officers froze. Even the treadmill belt slowed, as if afraid to keep running. Lena's expression didn't change. Not much, at least. But her fingers tightened on her armrests, a tiny tremor betraying the discomfort that came whenever her past was dragged into the present. Operative ward. The colonel said, voice carrying through the gym with formal precision. Ghost 6, it is an honor to have you back on Falcon Ridge. The privates looked as if the floor might swallow them whole. One muttered under his breath, Ghost 6? No, that can't. But Cruz didn't bother explaining. The colonel turned his head, addressing not just the three young men, but everyone within earshot. Some of you may not know the designation, he began, his tone shifting into something reverent, something almost sacred. It belongs to a psychological operations unit, so covert it doesn't appear in public records. These operatives work in silence, in shadows, shaping outcomes before bullets ever fly. And in 2019, during the Khyber Rift incident, Ghost 6 executed an infiltration under active fire, extracted 2 Allied intelligence officers, and prevented a suicide detonation meant for a U.S. convoy. She continued mission execution after sustaining permanent spinal damage. A beat of stunned silence. He continued. Her choice to complete the op, instead of evacuating after the initial blast, saved 12 American lives. The youngest private's throat bobbed as he swallowed, eyes wide with realization. She completed the mission, the colonel said, turning back to Lena, eyes soft with respect no rank could command, even when she could no longer walk. Lena hated this part. The remembering, the spotlight, the way trauma was paraded like a medal. Sir, she said quietly, I'm only here for the resilience training briefing. I didn't want, you didn't ask for recognition. The colonel finished, nodding. That's exactly why you'll receive it. He turned sharply to the 3 privates, whose faces had gone chalk white. You touched her wheelchair, he said, voice low lethal. You obstructed her movement. You insulted a decorated operative under my command. The tallest private stammered. We didn't know. That is the problem, private, the command sergeant major barked. You didn't know who she was, so you treated her as less. Lena lifted a hand slightly. Sergeant Major, she said, voice steady. I'm not here to ruin careers. They're young. They made assumptions. We all have. But the Sergeant Major shook his head. That is precisely why they need the correction, ma'am. The colonel studied the soldiers with an expression that weighed judgment against potential, failure against teachability. Then he spoke. You will report to my office at 1400. All 3 of you. And bring notebooks. You're about to receive a lesson in humility, respect, and the lethal danger of assuming weakness. His gaze cut sideways to Lena. And if Operative Ward is willing, you will hear the story from her directly. Lena exhaled slowly. This wasn't what she wanted. But maybe it was what was needed. For them. For others. For every service member who judged the warrior instead of the wheels beneath her. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about change. And change had just begun walking, or rolling, straight toward them. 2 hours later, when the sun had shifted enough to cast long amber strikes across the administrative wing, the 3 privates sat stiffly in straight-back chairs outside the colonel's office, notebooks trembling slightly in their hands. No one spoke. The hallway was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against the ears like altitude, heavy and expectant. They didn't know what the colonel planned to say. They didn't know if they'd lose rank or face suspension. They only knew that they had insulted someone whose name carried weight far outside the base. A woman whose entire story they had misread because they only saw what the chair told them. When the door finally opened, they scrambled to their feet as the command sergeant major ushered them inside. The office was large but undecorated, clean walls lined with maps, operation photos, and a few framed commendations that whispered stories without telling them. But none of that mattered, because Lena Ward was there too, seated in her wheelchair beside the colonel's desk, posture calm, hands folded neatly in her lap. Atlas, her service dog, lay at her feet like a golden sentinel. She offered the privates a polite nod, nothing more. No pity, no superiority. No resentment, just acknowledgement. The colonel stood behind his desk, arms crossed, jaw set. Sit. He ordered, and the 3 lowered themselves gingerly into the chairs opposite him. Before anything else, he began, I want you to understand that this meeting is not solely about corrective discipline. It is about education, and about confronting the assumptions that compromise the integrity of this uniform. Then he turned to Lena, giving her the floor with a small incline of his head. She didn't start by listing her injuries. She didn't mention rank or operations or ghost designations. She began with something far quieter. "Before I ever deployed," she said, voice soft but unwavering, "I had a sergeant who taught me something I didn't appreciate until it was too late. He said, court courage is easy. Battlefield courage is earned. But the most important courage, the kind people underestimate, is the courage to see someone clearly." She let the words settle. The privates shifted uncomfortably, each feeling the sting of truth in different ways. "When I was injured," Lena continued, "I thought the hardest part would be the pain, the recovery, learning how to live again from a chair. But it wasn't." Her eyes flicked to them, steady and honest. "The hardest part was how people looked at me afterward, how they decided I was fragile, or broken, or less valuable. Not because of what I'd done, but because of what they thought the chair meant." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet carved its way into the room deeper than any lecture could. "You three reminded me of those people," she said, not unkindly, simply acknowledging the truth. "And I want you to understand that your mistake wasn't disrespecting me. It was disrespecting every service member you've never met, whose battles were fought off the record or paid for in ways you can't see." The tallest private lowered his head. "Ma'am," he whispered, voice cracking, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. We didn't think." "Exactly," Lena replied, and the softness in her tone cut sharper than anger ever could. "You didn't think. You didn't ask. You didn't consider who I might be. And that lack of consideration can cost lives in the field just as easily as bullets can." The colonel stepped forward then, folding his hands behind his back. "This base," he said, "will be implementing a mandatory program on recognizing invisible service and respecting injured personnel. Operative Ward has agreed, graciously, to help develop it." The private's eyes widened. Lena nodded once, accepting the weight of the task, but clearly not thrilled by the spotlight it brought. "I'm helping," she said, "not because I want recognition, but because I want to prevent another situation like this. Because someday, the person you underestimate might be someone you're supposed to follow into danger." The room held its breath. Then, unexpectedly, Lena turned her chair slightly toward the window where the afternoon sun stretched across the floor. "I didn't come to this base to teach lessons," she murmured. "I came because I'm still figuring out what my service looks like now. I came because resilience training matters. Because there are soldiers out there right now trying to rebuild their lives the way I had to rebuild mine." She exhaled slowly. "I don't want to be the ghost anymore. I want to be useful." The colonel's expression softened. "You are," he said, "more than you know." The command sergeant major cleared his throat, addressing the privates. "You three will write reflection reports, attend the new training, and assist in preparing materials. And you will treat Operative Ward with the respect owed to every veteran who has paid a price you cannot comprehend." They nodded furiously, but Lena shook her head gently. "Respect isn't owed," she said. "It's given. It's chosen. And I hope this helps you choose differently moving forward." The tension in the room broke, not with relief exactly, but with understanding, the kind that shifts the ground beneath a young soldier's feet and leaves them standing somewhere better. When the meeting concluded, the privates rose, bowed their heads to Lena, and left quietly, carrying notebooks filled with more than they expected to learn that day. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, painting the base in gold. Lena rolled toward the exit beside Cruz, Atlas trotting happily beside her. "You didn't have to do all that," Cruz said gently. "I know," she replied. "But maybe this is the mission now." Cruz looked at her, and for the first time since she'd returned to Falcon Ridge, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a guide, a reminder, a warrior still walking her path, just differently than before. And as she rolled across the courtyard, the breeze tugging at her hoodie and the faint sound of training drills echoing from the field, Lena Ward realized something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not the adrenaline-soaked, life-or-death purpose of covert operations, but the kind that builds instead of destroys, the kind that shakes instead of shadows. And in that quiet realization, the ghost finally came home.